Welcome back to our Bible study on the book of Daniel. I'm Father Ed. I am your guide as much as I can be. And this is for St Andrew's Southgate, but you're most welcome if you're joining us from elsewhere. So in this session number 4, and in this session we're going to look at chapters 7 to 9. I'm not going to put the text in front of you because there's quite a... I'm not going to read it, sorry. I will put the text in front of you because there is quite a lot. But of course the best thing is to have a Bible in front of you. Doesn't really matter the translation. So we go into a very different section of the book of Daniel. We move away from the sort of the stories, which are really memorable. We know them from Sunday school perhaps, or from school assemblies and that sort of thing. And they're wonderful tales, and we've gone through those now. But the second half, in a way, is a little bit more tricky. Here we have Daniel. Daniel has his own visions, which in turn need interpreting by angelic interpreters. And some of them are quite mysterious and very symbolic, and certainly on first reading, very difficult indeed. It presents itself now as a sort of a flashback, if you like. So we've gone back to the time of King Belshazzar. And that is probably significant because Belshazzar was kind of the worst of the Babylonian lot. And the prophecies are going to point towards the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, who is, sort of the worst of the next era of the sort of Seleucids and the Hellenistic kingdoms. So we have these incredible, and they are quite incredible and memorable, symbolic beasts that are put on trial before the Ancient of Days as their judge. By and large, what happens is the fourth beast is destroyed, the others lose their dominion, and then one, like a human being, receives dominion in place of them. That's a sort of a summary of it all. Now, there may be connections with Babylonian symbols or signs of the Zodiac that we no longer understand with these creatures. Certainly, a very similar lineup appears elsewhere in Scripture. So, for example, in Hosea 13:7-8, "So I will become like a lion to them, like a leopard I will lurk beside the way. I will fall upon them like a bear robbed of her cubs, and will tear open the covering of their heart. There I will devour them like a lion, as a wild animal would mangle them." And this is the words of God. And so these beasts, symbolic of different empires, are, as it were, being kind of used for God's purpose, even though they may well be quite wicked in themselves. I want to talk very quickly about the symbolism of the sea. Sea in the Bible, it tends to represent a sort of an untamed chaos. Like at creation, when God makes order by separating the waters, otherwise they're just a big sort of mush of chaos. So he puts some waters above and some below, and that sort of keeps them apart, and that creates some sort of order. But there are all kinds of beasts that kind of lurk in the deep that are, almost beyond our comprehension, like Leviathan and that sort of thing, But when God then decides to start again, as it were, to recreate, because of the wickedness of humanity at the flood, God takes the barrier away, as it were, in the sky, and the waters above again mix with the ones below, and we're back to an untamed chaos from which a new creation can begin again. So then we hear that there are 4 kingdoms that are going to come out of this untamed chaos. It doesn't mean they're going to come from the sea or they're going to come from over the sea. It means that they're coming from a place that requires the order of God within them. So, for example, Isaiah 17:13, we hear this: The nations roar like the roaring of many waters, but he will rebuke them, and they will flee far away, chased like chaff on the mountains before the wind, and whirling dust before the storm. So there you go. So the action of God is to tame these kingdoms, as it were, tame the waters, rebuke them. It certainly makes me think again about the story of Jesus calming the storm, as perhaps an analogy for taming the kingdoms of earth. And then we have, often alongside symbols of water, we have wind or air as well. The four winds are sort of the winds of heaven coming from every direction. It represents the whole of the world, that sort of a thing. But we might also think of Ruach and God's breath, that sort of brings life or brings order. So let's get into the symbols. The first beast, lion, of course a symbol of power and ferocity. The eagle is also very strong, but also swift. So we're certainly talking about Babylon, or we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar. If you like, maybe Nebuchadnezzar is the lion and his armies are the eagles, which sweep across the lands. The reference to made to stand upright like a man, it may well be a reference to Nebuchadnezzar, an allusion to his madness. I think that's almost certainly what it is, and we'll come to that later on about being sort of reformed in the image God intended as a human being, made to stand upright like a man, rather than this beast. There is a possibility. There's another solution, and that is that a lion on its back legs is rampant, is roaring and sort of ferocious. But I think it is the first interpretation that we should go with. So the second beast, the bear. This is the kingdom of the Medes. The three tusks possibly might show its ferocity or the number of kings that was known to the writer. But I prefer, I think, the translation ribs, which you will find in some of your Bibles. And I think that's probably better, because then that leaves us with this image that these are the bones left in the jaws of this bear after sort of 3 juicy meals. He's sort of chomping on them. And those could well be the nations of, for example, Ararat, Mini, and Ashkenaz. Raised up on one side, hard to say. Could mean sort of ready to pounce, something like that. Then we have the third beast, the leopard, swift and powerful. The 4 heads, so that look in different directions. That probably gives us the clue we need to tell us that it is the Persian Empire, which spread in all 4 directions all at once. The fourth beast is unknown, which is even more sort of ominous, but it's even more terrifying, dreadful and strong than the others. The iron teeth perhaps give us the connection with the iron legs of the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So if that were the case, again this would correlate with the Greek empires, and particularly Alexander the Great's empire. The 10 horns, almost certainly 10 kings in sequence, with the little horn finally being Antiochus Epiphanes, because he usurps the throne. Something that's going to be sort of confirmed in the later chapters. That was part of his character, or the way he was seen, that he didn't take power in the right ways, and power wasn't rightfully his. The human eyes, of course, remind us that this is a human being, at least in one respect, or there is a human being hiding in there somewhere behind all the beastliness. But what makes him so beastly is that he speaks arrogantly, loudly, calls himself God manifest, which is what that's exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes did. Epiphanes meaning the god manifest. I think he was so sort of arrogant and full of it that that was the reason that people gave him the nickname Epimanes, which doesn't mean God manifest, it means the mad. So the three horns uprooted probably refer to Demetrius, who Antiochus left as a hostage in Rome, his brother, also called Antiochus, and Ptolemy Philometor. Those are the three claimants to the throne that are pushed out of the way, uprooted. Spoke words against the Most High. Of course, this is blasphemy in using that name, Epiphanes. And what we need to know in the vision is that his days are numbered. They will be coming to an end. The other empires, we're told, will survive for a time. And that's interesting. So maybe a sort of a remnant will outlive the Seleucid Empire. Right, let's move on to the next chunk. So, big change of scene. Suddenly we are transferred to heaven. This wonderful image of heaven, and quite the opposite of the chaos and madness of the last vision of earth. We have a sort of a calm serenity and an order. We have the Ancient of Days, which is certainly God from the beginning to the end. White, the symbol of purity. Woolly hair, woolly white hair, the symbol of experience. And fire, the symbol of God's presence and cleansing, which will be part of God's judgment. The books are opened. So this is foreboding. It is judgment. That's what we're looking at. It is about keeping records. Just look at Malachi 3:16. Then those who revered the Lord spoke with one another. The Lord took note and listened, and a book of remembrance was written before him of those who revered the Lord and thought on his name. So it could well be, a list of of the people that are being judged, but it may also be a list of punishments or of laws. So the beasts are to be judged, almost certainly by the record of their wicked deeds. But then, one like a human being. It doesn't say a human being, it says one that resembled a human being. Just as the kingdoms resembled the beasts, but weren't actually lions, etc. So there's straight away this huge contrast of the human after the beastly. They held dominion on earth, the beasts. The one like a human, son of man, receives it from God. No usurping here. It rightfully received, in sort of humility. And this is, I think, definitely the stone not made by human hands. Who is this figure? His position is given not by humans, but by God. Let's just talk for a moment about the Archangel Michael, Israel's guardian. Every nation was thought to have a representative angel, which they often refer to as the princes of that nation. And their job more than anything is to protect and guard. And Michael is that to Israel, the representative guardian angel. And that may well be what is being thought of here when we see this. We're given this vision of one like a human. We've heard already on several occasions angels described as being human-like, and that would not be entirely surprising. Or it is a vision of the Messiah, and of course what we as Christians understand as the Messiah is quite different to what certainly the readers at the time would have thought in their minds about what a Messiah was. So we'll just sort of hold that in our minds. But what is important, I think, here is that we're going to see a growing theology in this of everything that happens on earth has a sort of a counterpart in heaven. So while the battles are raging on earth, that is also happening with angels at the same time. And the angels sometimes represent humanity, and certainly in this case, I think this Son of Man, whether it's an angel or it's the Messiah, certainly represents humanity below, as it were. The community as a corporate personality, a single figure, if you like, beyond the simple sum of its members. At the same time, this corporate figure presents and perfectly represents each individual member of the community. Yeah. And this is something, I think familiar to Christian theology later on, that Christ is the intermediary, the intercessor that pleads on our behalf and stands in our place, of course, on the cross and then before God. And the same works with the enemy to some extent. Each individual king is a representation of that much greater evil which has a grip on the world. So I think by and large I would say it is Jesus, and Jesus represents Israel and all people. Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man later on in the Gospels, of course, and those thrones that we heard about that we're not really sure who they're for, Jesus offers those thrones to his followers to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. So have a look at Psalm 8. Yet you have made them a little lower than God, and crowned them with glory and honour. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. So the reason I read you Psalm 8 is because God, in making humanity in God's image, gives us the most extraordinary dignity, the most extraordinary authority, but also the most extraordinary responsibility. The word in the Hebrew, of course, used for man, one like a man, is Adam, prototype of humanity. And that, of course, takes us back to Genesis, but also the fact that the judge here in this vision gives dominion, glory, and kingship to the one like a human, one like Adam. That takes us right back to Genesis. Here is man made in the image of God. So, in a sense, we are all heirs of the universal authority granted to Adam. It is in exercising this authority over the earth that the image is to be seen, because then humanity shares in God's kingship and sovereignty. This is, I think, that in the vision here, it even goes a little bit further than Genesis. Even greater status is given to humanity. So this one like a human being here that is presented before God is what every human should be if they are true to type as being made in the image of God. This is the dignity proper to humanity, all humanity, and embodying all our potential. So this everyman, one like a human, strips away all distinctions of race, colour, nationality, culture, all summed up in one. This is not Son of Israel, but Son of humanity, the firstborn of God. And so back to the figure in heaven, Again, if the figure is Jesus, well, that works very well for me in my theology, that is entirely right. Jesus doesn't just reveal what God is like to humanity, but Christ reveals to us what humanity is like or should be like to humans. And that is why, as we get closer to the cross, the humans all around Jesus become more beastly, and finally, we get to the point where the only one that really looks human anymore is Jesus. Behold the man, ecce homo, is what Pilate says. So, conversely, the empires and kings talked about, they are inhumane, if you like. They are subhuman, not worthy of the dignity of being human, certainly not made in God's image. Perhaps only the eyes are left of Antiochus Epiphanes. Only when humanity lives up to what it is meant to be can it receive the kingdom that is everlasting. So if the kingdom is given to one like a human, then human kingdoms can be good and just. So just like sort of Christ redeems the flesh by becoming human, so the one like a Son of Man redeems kingship, redeems kingdom and authority, human authority. It's not all bad. In fact, it's intended, but it is abused. Romans 13, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. So really, we are all heirs of Adam, but perhaps the rulers of the world have a particular responsibility to be Adam, to be in God's image, and to exert the authority and responsibility given to first humanity. Of course, the coming with clouds, that reminds us of the Sinai covenant, and whenever we have sort of clouds and things like that, the connection with the presence of God. So just coming back again to that idea that what happens on earth has its counterpart in heaven, victory is obtained as a fusion of human and godly activity. God fights for Israel, but Israel must also fight for God. That is their hesed, which is the word that came up several times in Ruth, their loving loyalty to each other. The people and God. So we move on to verses 19 to 22. Right, now in this section, we can empathise with Daniel, who is a little unsatisfied with the explanation so far. His head's swimming with it all. He wants a bit more information. It was all a bit too brief. And it's lovely because he sort of represents where we're at, a bit like he sort of represented Israel in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're in the court of God, and we want to know what questions Daniel's going to ask. Actually, when we're given the more information, it seems to slightly contradict the last passage in a few places. For example, the horn now, it seems greater. Apparently, it's whereas we were told it was small before. Perhaps that is because its impact grows. It starts small and it gets sort of larger, or that although the horn may seem high and mighty, actually, behind it, Antiochus Epiphanes is a kind of a pathetic sort of a man, so is still a small horn. Let's keep going to... I just mentioned that the Holy Ones. So the Holy Ones are... they're either angels or Israel, but I suspect it's Israel, or certainly some of the people of Israel. Yes, and that the beasts are prevailing, or the horn is prevailing over the holy ones, is almost certainly meaning persecution. Right, now we will move on. 23 to 28. Right, okay. So we come to really the real wickedness of Antiochus Epiphanes. 3 sins we have in verse 25. He shall speak words against the Most High, that is blasphemy. He shall wear out the holy ones of the Most High, this is persecution. And shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law. We believe from other historical sources that Antiochus wanted to change to the Roman calendar, but for the Jews this was particularly difficult because their festivals and everything were of their own calendar, but also because in Genesis it is God that sets the times and the seasons. That responsibility and that authority belongs to God and should not belong to anyone else. And so again, it's sort of that Antiochus Epiphanes is trying to step into the shoes of God. The Jewish rituals and laws, they're all banned, and this is a terrible time for them. This is true persecution now. And the question, of course, is how long? How long is this awfulness going to go on for? 3.5 years, we're told. 3.5 is half of 7, which is the perfect number. So 3.5 is an imperfect number. So this is it's an amount of time that is limited. God will not let this go on forever, but it is an evil. It is an imperfect and an evil sort of a time. Evil but not long. I think that's the shorthand. But the last kingdom, which comes afterwards, given to one like a human, will last forever. We've got to chapter 8. I'm going to start with verses 1 to 8. So another slightly later flashback, but still in the reign of Belshazzar, King Belshazzar, the worst ruler of the Babylonians. And now we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, the worst ruler of the Seleucids. Susa was one of the capitals of the Persian Empire. It was apparently where the rulers spent spring. Isn't that nice? They spent different seasons in different capitals. So huge was the empire. Next to a river, possibly reminds us of the Exodus, when the people regularly found themselves next to rivers. The river Ulai, or Ulai, probably Ulai, means in Hebrew perhaps, possibly an expression of hope, or of sort of, crossroads, if you like. Again, the animals, we are told, come from a primordial chaos, but this time the animals are domestic animals, slightly different. And it's almost certainly now to do with the signs of the Zodiac. We know from other sources that Aries the ram was associated with Persia, and the king would march into battle with a golden head of a ram as a diadem. And the goat, we are told, represents Alexander the Great. It's a wonderful sort of allegory of the struggle between Persia and Greece. Fantastic bit of history. The ram butts towards 3 points of the compass. In 3 directions the empire expanded. And this all ends with the great battle of Gorgomela. The horns, we are told, were the king's in this instant. The length of the horns probably denotes the military prowess of the different kings. The horn is broken. This is Alexander the Great's very untimely death. About 30 years old, I think it was. 4 horns grew up in its place. These are the 4 generals that Alexander leaves his divided kingdom to, including the 2 that we are interested in, Seleucus and Ptolemy, who end up sort of fighting over in Judea, with Seleucus eventually winning, and or the Seleucids eventually winning. Verses 9 to 14. So the little horn again, Antiochus Epiphanes. He attacks the people, but this affects the heavens. It grew as high as the host of heaven. It threw down to earth some of the host and some of the stars and trampled on them. And that's important. Like I say, that what happens on earth has a counterpart in heaven. The people of God are both earthly beings and heavenly beings. They're intrinsically linked, the heavens and the earth. So really, anti-Semitism is deicide. I think that's a really important point. Likewise, the temple and the sanctuary, that stands for the people as much as it does the building. The people are the temple and sanctuary of God. They carry the Spirit of God around in them, and yes, and what happens to the sanctuary will also happen to the people. The stars can also mean other kings. I should say that rivals who perhaps have suffered at his hands. Stars associated with the coming of a king, of course, in the story of Jesus' birth, but also sort of David's star, that sort of thing. The Prince of Hosts is certainly God, and Antiochus certainly attempts to rival God with his name Epiphanes. Towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land, this is Egypt, Parthia, and then, of course, Judah. That is the beautiful land, of course. It takes control of this beast, or this animal, of the Jews and of their religious observance, casting truth to the ground. We're told Antiochus Epiphanes literally destroyed the Torah and all the scriptures he could get his hands on. The regular burnt offerings, the transgression that makes desolate. So this is the temple worship is stopped, banned, and there is some huge desecration of the temple. It may be that he sacrifices a pig on the altar, or of course he certainly erects a statue of Zeus in the temple. So one angel then asks another, when? And I think it's quite important that one angel asks another, because this is almost beyond us. If an angel doesn't know, then what chance do we have? And it is indeed difficult to discern. 2,300 we are given of morning and evening worship. So if we take morning and evening as one day, and the 2,300 as representing each of the times of sacrifice and prayer, then we divide it by 2 to get the days. That's 1,150. Then we divide that by 364 days. Then we get 3 years and a bit. And so I don't know, but we end up with sort of 3.5 again, a very similar figure. And I've already talked about that, so I won't do it again. Verses 15 to 18, 19 to 19. So again, I think we've got to note that the one that appears, almost certainly an angel again, has the appearance of a man, and then the other one, we hear a voice, and that is a very, very human voice. So again, linking to all the stuff we've already talked about, I won't go over again, but it's worth noting. And here we are told that the vision is for the time of the end. So that could mean the end of all time. But it could also mean the day when God intervenes. It could mean, when the temple defilement comes to an end, when it establishes a new kingdom in which Israel will be preeminent. I think it's also worth noting that all those who speak directly to God, we are told, fall face down on the ground. I think except Moses is about the only one. And then, need propping up again. So Gabriel sets Daniel upright again. Such is the, extraordinariness of the vision of the divine. So really this section is kind of just a big rant against Antiochus Epiphanes. So there's not a huge amount that I want to say here, to be honest. But we are assured that the vision and the timing is true, and that it needs to be sealed for now, because it refers to many days from now. I suppose that seal, it sort of guards the vision from misuse, which I think an awful lot of visions are misused. And whenever you have something as symbolic as this and apocalyptic, people will come up with all kinds of theories and will use the text to say all sorts of things that they want it to say. And then Daniel, who is sort of exhausted by it all, it is quite a burden, having done all this, and he's got to get back to a full day's work, working for the king. But he still doesn't understand it, and perhaps we can empathise. So we move on to chapter 9. Now we are at a flashback again, but this is to the time of Darius. So Darius wasn't a bad guy, if you remember. So this is the time when the people will soon be able to return to Judah, or maybe they already have, but I think they're probably about to. But the return is, I think, disappointing. The temple is indeed rebuilt after approximately 70 years, but they are still under the yoke of a foreign empire, and that situation will get worse and not better all the way into the 2nd century BC. So we turn now to the question of why not? Jeremiah had said 70 years, and indeed the initial exile has drawn to a close, and that 70 years is pretty accurate. But this doesn't feel like the fulfillment of a prophecy that sees Israel take its rightful place in the world. We're not seeing this stone turn into a sort of a mountain and become dominant yet at all. Note that Daniel himself reads in the scriptures and discerns the number 70, but only now, after prayer, will he be given clarity. So he's had to earn it by his deep meditation on it. And that's what we're given, 70. We start with penitence and confession, sackcloth and ashes. I think it's worth noting, for those who want to dig a lot deeper, is that many scholars see this chapter as out of place and with a theology much more akin to the book of Deuteronomy. But I'm not going to get into that now. Let's carry on with a good old chunk here, verses 4 to 14. So, why has it all taken so much longer than we thought? Well, the answer appears to be that Israel has continued to sin. Each successive generation has sinned, and therefore the end of this age is delayed. Indeed, even by the 2nd century BC, under the Seleucids, many Jews are allowing themselves to be Hellenized, following Greek culture. And this was a real threat to Jewish identity at that later date. The obvious sins of the empire and their kings is one thing, and we've addressed that in many stories in the first chapters. But the less obvious sins of Israel now need addressing. We have sinned and done wrong, verse 5, acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside. That's actually, I think, in that little sentence, there's 5 different ways of sort of sinning, or it's only expressed in 5 different ways. Verse 11, curse in the law of Moses. I think, yes, there we go. Scholars think this is linked to Leviticus 26. If you continue hostile to me and will not obey me, I will continue to plague you 7-fold for your sins. I will let loose wild animals against you, and they shall bereave you of your children and destroy your livestock. They shall make you few in number, and your roads shall be deserted. So they had been warned, as it were. There we are. And now we have this petitionary prayer where Daniel will plead on the behalf of the people, the role of the prophet as intercessor. Daniel exonerates God from any blame for the delay. That's important. Instead, it is the people that are to blame for it. The request is not based on the righteousness of the people, but on the nature of God. So this is grace, isn't it? God's faithfulness to his people is contrasted with the lack of faithfulness to God by God's people. There's been Hesed on one side, if you like. And then this interesting bit, for your own sake, for God's reputation. I suppose because, God has made his promise and the people are making that promise difficult to fulfill. And then we just end the passage with what some call the Jewish Kyries. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act and do not delay. I think that is a really beautiful prayer. I wish we used it in sort of liturgical situations. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act and do not delay. Verses 20 to 27. So now Gabriel comes again to Daniel, and we are told that it's not the 70 years, and that's perhaps why things do not seem right yet. It is 70 weeks of years. A week of years being 7 years, with a sabbatical year at the last one of each 7. So this would be 7 times 70, which is 490, which approximately would take us up to the time of the murder of the high priest by Antiochus Epiphanes, the anointed one. Then we're told that, of course, that the temple had been rededicated. That's the anointing of a most holy place. But then all that rebuilding, all of that will be undone, because 62 weeks of years later, the high priest will be killed, and the temple should be desecrated. The 490 years is also, very neatly, it makes 10 Jubilee years. So a Jubilee year being 7 times 7. 7 is a week of years with a Sabbath on the last year. 7 times 7 makes a Jubilee, which is like a grand Sabbath, as it were. It's a great restoring, the Jubilee, when if you had been enslaved or you had lost your property over the years or even over the generations, that would be restored to you. So we are, 49, 7 times 7 makes 49, of course you times that by 10, so you get 10 Jubilee years in that time. So it's almost like this is a great grand sort of a Jubilee of some sort that we're going to be coming to, whereby, the kingdom that will destroy the other kingdoms and last forever will free the people. The Gospels obviously seem to think that the prophecy refers to Christ and the kingdom he proclaims. This beginning bit, 70 weeks are decreed for your people in your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Christ fulfills all of this and becomes the replacement of the temple. And it's interesting because, of course, Jesus tells us to forgive 70 times 7 times. And this can't be a literal amount, of course. So perhaps we shouldn't expect the 70 weeks of years to be literal either, but to represent a kind of a complete and fullness of Jubilee, or in the case of Jesus, a complete and fullness of forgiveness. So the exile really lasts through all 4 of the kingdoms mentioned and depicted as the statue, and then we have the same story essentially told through the beasts. That is why the readers in the 2nd century are still waiting. The other thing I should mention is that, of course, for some Christian scholars, the anointed one that is killed is not the high priest, but it is Christ. And that is what this prophecy refers to. I think in the first place it's not, it is the high priest. But because Christ is the great high priest, it's almost like the story happens in microcosm and then on a much wider sort of a plane. Christ certainly is the temple not made with human hands. Right, that is enough for this session. We've still got 2 more. We're going to cover the last 3 chapters in the next session, and then there'll be a further one where I'll really give you my own sort of thoughts on the book of Daniel. So I hope you'll be able to join us for those. Okay, thanks, bye.